Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 298 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located at my site, ContinueFit.com. It's also where you can find out more about my book, Be Like the Best, and the Be Like the Best workbook. The book consists of 50 interviews with top fitness professionals, and after each interview is a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge based off of a takeaway from the interview that will help you be like the best. Go to ContinueFit.com or BeLikeTheBest.com. All right, today on StrengthCoach.com, Coach's Corner spoke to Coach Boyle about two of his articles, the top 4 exercises for clients over 40 and the worst 4 exercises for clients over 40. We talked about the whys behind his reasons here, so interesting stuff from Coach Boyle. For the TrainHeroic data-driven coaching segment, Tim and Adam discuss more about the product market fit and focusing on a concern we often hear. My athletes aren't committed enough. Sometimes they are, but they just aren't focused on what we as the coach values. Remember, Coach Boyle and I both use TrainHeroic to deliver our online training. We're super happy with it. They have an amazing customer service and a really easy to use platform. And they just launched plans that start as low as $10 a month with a free 14-day trial. And if you mention that we sent you, they'll put a 4-week athlete development program in your account absolutely free. So check it out at TrainHeroic.com to take the free 14-day trial. All right, for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. I have on Kendall Green. Coach Green talked about his sprint dominant training philosophy, sprinting distances, drills, and volume, and how he kind of programs it. Contrast training using hill sprints, so this is pretty interesting. Speed and power for the high school athlete. Coaching speed technique, what he thinks. Programming Plyos and med balls. Utilizing the floor press. Thoughts on max training and conditioning and playing surfaces and what the relationship is. So great stuff from Coach Green coming up in a little while. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 30 days. That's right, 30 days, just $1. We're doing that till all gyms in the U.S. are open. Might even throw Canada in there. I know Toronto and Ottawa, they are closed right now as well. California, there's places in California. Results Fitness is still closed. It's pretty crazy. But we're doing the 30 days for $1 until all gyms are open. So you'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Hanging in there, getting ready for... we talked a little bit about it. We're not going to talk about it on here because we don't want to lose any listeners. But, elections coming up, getting crazy. The world's crazy right now. So we're looking forward to just kind of passing the November 3rd date. And I hope that is I hope it's over then. And we're not here in January talking about what's going on with the election. So, but yeah, just trying to bide my time right now for that.
Yeah, I'm not, as I said, I'm going to keep it all off mic so we don't get ourselves in trouble.
Coach, you posted actually an article last week and then one today. Top 4 exercises for clients over 40. So I want to kind of, although for some people might be like, well, I don't train anybody over 40, but most people do. You can't just train for the most part, your strength coaches. But I want to talk about this a little bit. We're talking about both sides. Top 4 exercises. First one was standing cable press. Me personally, obviously I had mostly, my guys were over 50, but I absolutely love this just because I love to stand up and do And anything I could do standing up, I always loved it. But talk to us about why you loved the standing cable press.
I'm the same way. I love that. I love it mainly. I feel like the standing up part, the anterior anti-extension core, is just a side benefit. The biggest thing is, and I don't know why, for me, it's the only press I can do that's pain-free. And every person that I know, everyone who says my shoulders bother me, I can't bench, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, just try this. And they all try it, and they all look at you sort of with that, I call it the dog look. You know how when you talk to your dog kind of tilts his head and looks at you like,
Yeah.
it sort of knows. But they give you the dog look like, why doesn't this hurt? Like, I don't understand. And I'm kind of like, I don't really understand either. And maybe I do, like, if we really start to think about it, maybe there really is, because you don't have a bench behind you, because your humerus is being forced back into your glenoid. Usually most people are sitting anteriorly, that you suddenly get this beautiful pain-free motion. So it's so funny because it's called an AT Sports Flex, which is the piece that you need to do it. It was Alan Thomas, who was a White Sox strength and conditioning coach. I think he still is a White Sox strength and conditioning coach, but I'm not 100% sure. But Perform Better sells it. And when AT showed it to me when I was working for the Red Sox, and I was literally like, this thing is freaking magic. This is unbelievable.
Mike, why do you need that? Like, why don't you just do one arm?
Well, you could just do one arm too. Well, the nice thing, I always think from an efficiency standpoint, when you're in a hurry, two arm always works better.
True.
But if you got all day, you can do one arm at a time, and just obviously every exercise takes twice as long when you have to do right arm, left arm. But if I have somebody that's particularly painful, I will do one arm, because I think then you can do different weights and different loads.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, and I think I love what you said about hidden benefit number 2, because I think, again, this goes back to art of coaching until you really understand, until you're working with people a lot and they start to see it. There's no preconceived notion. No one cares. Like when I was like, I'll put it on 25, and for some of my guys, they didn't care. They weren't sitting there going, looking at the guy next to him with a dumbbell who's doing 45 or 50 and thinking, or remembering back when they were 20 doing a certain amount of weight. So I think that's a huge part of why I always loved the Kaiser and doing standing work.
Yeah, absolutely true. And that's why I tried to highlight that in terms of when you have that, like you said, especially with someone, because the hardest thing with training older clients that are aging, is getting them to accept aging, getting them to accept sort of, less is more, addition by subtraction, all these things that, joint friendly and orthopedic cost, like, because everybody just, especially if they've got a little meathead in them and they've lifted some weights before, it's really difficult. So when you totally are out of context, it's much better, because they don't look and say, well, how much does the average 40-year-old standing cable press, Mike?
Yeah, it's true. Let's move on to X pull down. This is interesting because X pull I've been doing forever. Obviously, it's very, Kaiser friendly. So I always had the Kaiser when I had the facility, and I always loved it. But I'll be honest, I liked it more from the perspective of like a mixing it up. Okay, yeah, we're gonna do neutral grip. We're gonna do like a pull up, pronated grip, a supine grip, whatever, pronate, chin up, pull up, and then X pull. And I never really thought. I know I did. I've read about them, obviously, and there's different, your shoulder blades are moving down in a different way, blah, blah, blah. But I really more just thought of it as mixing it up a little bit and getting some different angles or different muscle fiber.
Yeah, and I think it's way more than that. So that's more of our starting go-to. Like everybody starts with X pull downs because, again, when you think about sort of shoulder mechanics and getting some posterior capsule stretch, going across your body that way gives you more stretch in the posterior shoulder, something that you don't get when you do any other type of pull down, when you don't cross the midline. And then, we talk about this all the idea of, wanting to cross the midline. And as you cross the midline, you're naturally pulled into internal rotation. You're kind of pulled into that thumb down position. And then as you pull into a thumb up position. So I always talk about, the shoulder's kind of a spiral diagonal joint. It loves that spiral diagonal motion, and it moves, the humeral head moves really well under the acromion when you do that. And so again, there's a lot of what I would call joint friendly mechanics that are occurring in that X pull down that aren't occurring in other variations. So to me, again, if I've got somebody who's starting out and I think, okay, this is someone who, is a little banged up, I'm probably starting standing cable press and X pull down for my push and my pull.
Absolutely. Yeah, good explanation. Coach, split squat. I agree on this one too. The lunge with some people, they want to jump right into a lunge. And I love this to kind of start out with my older folks only because, and also even my younger guys, because this is how I start out, just to get the motion down. They start to understand it. It's the first regression there. So, but like you talked about, great hip flexor stretch, which, you know, if you're over 40, most likely you need some work there.
Exactly. And there's so many, and again, that's another one. People don't argue with you like, hey, can we load this up? Because most of them are really struggling to balance on, you know, and that's where you get the opportunity to explain, because people always say, oh, I can't do this, I have terrible balance. And I look at them and I think, there's nothing wrong with your inner ear that makes this exercise difficult for you. You're weak. But we equate being weak on one leg with having bad balance. And they're not the same thing. And I try to get people to understand that you don't have bad balance. When you need to hold on to something, that tells you that, you know, the muscles primarily in your hip that are supposed to be helping you to stabilize aren't doing their job, and that the muscles in your legs aren't really strong enough to just get you up and down. You know, it's amazing to watch some people who can't get up out of a split squat, you know, who need a deloaded kind of split squat where they have to hang on to, you know, the Kaiser with the Kaiser handles or something like that to get the strength to just get out of the bottom. And this is why I actually did Rocky's podcast the other day, Snyder. And one of the, you know, we talked about the idea. I said, I love body weight before external resistance for lower body. And I like external resistance before body weight for upper body. So if I've got somebody that's over 40, I want them standing cable pressing. I want them X pull down. I don't want them doing chin-ups. I don't want them doing push-ups. But lower body, I really want to hammer that one leg straight leg deadlift and split squat, because you're going to develop that quote unquote balance. And really what you're developing when you're developing balance is single leg strength and stability. So I think it's a huge eye opener for people when they see how much they can't handle their body weight on one leg.
I really do like what you talk about too with, you know, exercise 4 was the reaching one leg straight leg deadlift, which you just talked about. And no one's really looking to add weight to that anytime soon. There, you know, it does take a while to perfect. It's also one of those things that sometimes takes a couple reps for some people. Like once they know what they're doing, like, oh man, the first couple reps, but then when they really, you know, when the foot starts working a little bit, then their form totally cleans up. So I really love that as a warm up as well. Once they get into more advanced progressions,
over and over and over again. But I think you're absolutely right. Like some people, like you might call it a warm up, but you know, and it goes back to the idea of turning things on. And I always say we don't really turn things on because they're not off. And I go back to the dimmer switch analogy. It's more like the dimmer switch in your room where maybe I've got the light up at 10%. And if I shove that dimmer switch all the way up, or I turn that dimmer switch all the way up, depending on whether you've got the sliders or the dials, all of a sudden it's really bright. And I feel like that's hip muscles when you start doing unilateral stance stuff with people. Like even our kids, when we start out, I mean, they look like, you know, a one-legged Bambi when they're trying to stand on that one foot and reach. I mean, they can't figure out how to move against their hip with their foot on the ground to save their life. And it's the same with our adults. And so we've got a bunch of those old power balls that kind of single handle medicine balls. They look like a kettlebell, a plastic kettlebell, and 2 pound, 4 pound. And we use those a ton with people just to get them into that reaching pattern.
Coach, I'll tell you though, there's one hidden benefit for me as well with this. And that is, I try to explain, especially to my older folks, about the importance of some of the barefoot training and not just going around, walking around the gym barefoot, but, you know, like what you talked about with, you know, the rock mats, et cetera, and understanding how important it is to be barefoot. Well, with this exercise, after I show or I talk to people about, you know, the importance of barefoot and, you know, maybe even just doing the warm up barefoot, but when I take people's shoes off for this exercise, so I always have them do it in the beginning with their shoes on, and then they take their shoes off, they it totally cleans it up many times, and they start to understand, oh, wow, I'm so much better this way. I think it's a great way to teach people like about the importance of how important it can be to be barefoot.
Oh yeah, there's no question, and that's where it's funny because we kind of obviously we have to be in socks, but when you see some of the sort of it's like platform orthopedic sneakers, you can't even really call them sneakers that people are wearing and then wondering why they have trouble in terms of their foot function, and then you get them out of this shoe and all of a sudden I have said this a million times, but again, probably not to you and probably not on the podcast, but back in our toe shoe days, which we played around a lot with the Vibrams, and then Adidas was making they called them Adipures, a toed shoe, but it was amazing that people couldn't even get them on. They could not get their toes in the holes. And I explain to people all the time that if I gave you gloves and you looked at me after about 5 minutes and said, I can't get these on. I keep sticking 2 fingers. I can't find the holes with my fingers. It's a real problem. I don't think I'm going to wear gloves. Do you have any mittens? Right? That person would go to the hospital. They would be looking like, take me to the emergency room. I have a neurological disease. And yet the fact that their foot is like that, like a club, right? That they can't separate their toes. They can't get in. Their toes are much shorter than their fingers, right? But they can't, they end up there like, I think I have 2 toes in one. And I'm like, you think? You're like, I think so. Yeah, one of these is empty, but I can't really. And I'm like, so you can't feel your 4th and 5th toe? Is that what you're trying to tell me? And they're kind of like, yeah, basically. But yet it doesn't rattle you at all. Like there's not a moment of thinking, oh, that might be problematic. And I don't understand how we can have such a great relationship like with our hands and our fingers and such a bad relationship with our feet where we just, it's almost like I said, we don't care. Just, wrap them up in something and don't look at them. Keep it going.
It's so true. And Mike, I know Charlie had recommended these a while back, and I've been using them lately because my wife had to have an operation on her foot for, oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting what the name of it is now when you're, bunion, Jesus. And so, working on those toe separators, right? And a lot of people swear by those things. Doctors give them. She had a whole bunch she had to buy for that. Have you talked to have you ever used those or have thought about those at all?
We haven't actually, no, but we did have, well, remember we had Tom Michaud, I think he was on the podcast too.
Mm-hmm.
And he came over, and was talking, I mean, we don't give a shit about our feet. That's the bottom line. It's, you know what I mean? It's just like, as long as they're on the ground, we feel like we're okay. And that's really problematic when you start looking, even now, like I try to spend, even at my house, time barefoot. I go out to get the paper. I walk out barefoot. I got a hot tub in the back that I've been spending a lot of time in now reading, sitting in the hot tub, and I'll walk out to the hot tub and I've got stone out there and I'll walk out barefoot. I really am trying. And interestingly enough, my back has felt really, really good. So we're back to the Phillip Beach.
Coach, yeah. And are you still wearing the Vibrams as much, or the 5 fingers?
No, you know what? We got away from them, and it had nothing to do with the toe shoe idea. It was the smell. To be honest, it was unbelievable how the smell of those versus regular sneakers. I think from having your toes in them, I mean, they got to the point where they were uncleanable and unsavable. And after a while, it was like, okay, I'm going to go through. I went through a whole bunch of pairs of those, and I went through a million pairs of those Injinji toe socks and all that stuff. But I think I just got lazy and then stopped.
Yeah, no, they do get a little bit. But I got to say, once you do get in those easily, you feel, you after a while, you're like, they feel great. I love those things.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably should go back to it, to be honest.
Coach, the 4 worst exercises, I feel like, we don't need for you, like, to put over 40 there, because these are just exercises that you do not like for really almost anybody, which is back squat, straight bar deadlifts, bench press, barbell bench press, and then chin-ups and pull-ups. I know that is the exception here for the younger crowd.
even barbell bench press. We barbell bench press everybody except our baseball guys.
Okay.
I wouldn't consider myself. That's why I said I felt like this was kind of a half and half sort of article. And it's sort of like even straight bar deadlift. Like if you look at it, it's like, hey, we don't like back squat, but we like goblet squat. We don't necessarily like straight bar deadlift, but we do trap bar deadlift with our younger clients. So you're right. I mean, but I think the other thing, and this goes back to what we talk about on the podcast all the time, I don't think enough people understand my stances, our stances, MBSC stances, whatever, on particular things, because I think we've gotten to the point where we're assuming that everybody knows what we think. But in reality, like I just got a couple of, another email, there were questions like, I got a mom who emailed me saying, our strength coach won't let my daughter back squat, and he says it's because of you. And she has no idea. She's the mom of a volleyball player, and she thinks that back squats are a great exercise. And you realize this is a woman who knows nothing about strength and conditioning and nothing about Mike Boyle. And suddenly she's realizing, but this guy's saying Mike Boyle says we shouldn't do this. So I do think sometimes these maybe oversimplified articles will help the newer person, someone who hasn't been on the site forever and maybe isn't a CFSC, isn't an MBSC person. So that's why I started writing them, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like we've talked about in the past with, like, for example, a front squat. And then, sometimes with your younger guys, you were doing that because it helped them understand about the catch position and et cetera. But you might not do that for everybody. And everyone thinks, oh, he's never doing anything bilateral, but you are doing something. So it does clear up a little bit. So good stuff, Coach. All right. Well, those articles are free on strengthcoach.com. They're in the free section. The 4 best exercises for people over 40 and the 4 worst exercises for people over 40. Coach, we will let you go. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Ian. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, right now at Perform Better, it's here, the huge holiday sale. This is one of their biggest sales all year, kind of like the summer sale. 40% off selected items. There's over 100 items on sale right now. Do not miss this. Guys, remember I told you this last time. Pro tip, if you don't see something or if it says out of stock, call them because they're super helpful, first of all. And they can tell you when things are coming back in stock. I did this with the bumper plates, so I'm glad I did because then I got the bumper plates a little bit quicker. So make sure you call them and check them out at performbetter.com.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome to the TrainHeroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Let's do it.
So today, Tim and I are going to talk, following up on this coaching business best practices little series we got going on. It's a topic that I think every coach has been vexed by, which is, to be honest, athletes often don't want what coaches want them to want.
I don't know if truer statement has ever been said, but you're right. In a broad term, like athletes in general, right?
Right. And so like sometimes, the relationship is such that your job is to try to get them to do the thing that they should do. So if you're coaching youth athletes and the purpose is supposed to be sport performance, then like you have a specific goal you're trying to reach. But it gets really interesting when you're talking about paying adults who are opting into a service, right? They're buying, or they think they're buying, a certain thing. And sometimes on the other side, the coach is like, they want to provide a different thing, basically. And to me, a lot of times that comes down, having experienced this, is that your values are just different, right? Like I value structured training. I value targeted approach and all that because I went to school and had it drilled into me, and I'm that kind of person. And that's how I train too, myself.
Yeah.
But they're the athlete and you're the coach. You guys are different,
Very different. I actually have a story here. Just this week, a coach reached out to me. Let me lay the framework here. They have a couple teams on the TrainHeroic marketplace. One's very structured, highly progressed, very, science-backed, if you will, all the good stuff, right? Training Olympic lifts. The other offering, the team they have, is much more daily general pop training. Okay. And this coach reaches out to me and he says, we have a handful of clients or athletes who want to transfer from this more committed, and I have doing air quotes here, team to, the more general pop team. And these are generally uncommitted folks whose goals change all the time. And the takeaway there for me was in the language. And I warned the coach, I said, I don't think these folks are uncommitted. They've been paying you for your service, some of them for more than a year. But you have to understand that these folks and people who are paying for training probably have jobs. They probably have families. They probably have a house to take care of. Not all. There are still those people in the committed, quote unquote, team. But priorities change, right? So you have to be able to adapt and adjust and find out what is driving those particular folks to find success. And I don't think the connotation can be negative, Adam. I think it's just got to be, all right, these people are committed, just in a different way.
I mean, this is just the, adult athlete psychology at play in some ways, which is like, if you had competitive days, they might be over, right? You may not be making progress every time you step in the gym now. Yeah. But the truth is, a lot of these people aren't even after that necessarily. They still like to make progress. They still like to be told they're doing better and make, they get gains here and there. Sure. But a lot of it's more subjective, and it's just like, man, I got to get in the gym and I got an hour to do a workout, and I don't want to think about it, and I want it to feel productive and fun. Yeah. And yes, I want to make progress, but I don't spend my time thinking about it because I'm thinking about my job and my family now.
Totally. The majority of people, I think, Adam, aren't going to be what we generally think of as like these hyper competitive world-class athletes who are going to be in the gym 4 times a week with 2 agility sessions if they're a field or court athlete, or, in there 6 or 7 days a week if they're a power lifter. The majority of folks just want to feel like they're making progress. And if you want to enter a niche market where it is, I want the competitive athlete, that's fine. It's going to take a lot of work. And there frankly aren't that many people, right? If you broaden the goals a little bit, I want to be fit, I want to be around longer for my grandkids, I want to lose some fat, that population grows. And then if you just look at people who, want to feel healthy, that's the majority of the total addressable market. And I'm not saying it's bad to find a niche. It's definitely not. But you have to realize these things, that not all of your folks are going to have see the same through line in your training.
Well, and it's not that you don't have a niche in either case. Like we're talking about this one team, it is centered around, even the daily training is still centered around barbell work.
Right. And it's still good training, right? I didn't want to give the illusion that it's not.
No. It's not a joke at all. Like, it's just that like this coach wants to be a serious coach of serious competitors.
Correct.
But the truth is that like, it's hard to pay the bills to those people unless you stand out in that niche, right?
Right.
So it's just hard to get enough people who like stay committed for that long, and you keep building, your clientele that way. Right. It's the masses, pay the bills in a lot of places. You go to any physical location that's a sports performance gym.
Right.
And almost all of them I've ever seen have like adult fitness classes, and that's who keeps the lights on.
Totally. And this is the kind of the part where you take your things you've learned as a coach, like goal setting, managing expectations. You turn your business brain on a little bit and say, all right, now I need to gain some feedback from these folks. I need to have conversations. I need to learn what's working, what's not working. If you can combine those two things, you're going to help these folks find their way from point A to point B. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And I think to just remember that like these people are committed. They just may not be committed to like these discrete, like smart goals that, like we've been trained to try to set with people. It's like, it's more about life progress. Like we talk to these folks, these athletes, and they tell us things about like how they see their friends who have chronic health problems.
Right.
It just, the perspective is just different when you by the time you reach a certain age and you're a certain point in your life, I think.
Yep. Perspective's different. Priorities change.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to TrainHeroic.com, start your 14-day free trial. We got new pricing in there starting as low as $9.99 to suit any kind of coach.
All right, now it's time for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. We just started posting the staff meetings on there as well because, Mike takes off in the summer from the staff meetings, but they just started them. We got a few on there already, and I'm sure there's going to be some in-services coming very soon. So check that out at BodyByBoyleOnline.com. All right. Today I got on Coach Kendall Green. He's a strength and conditioning coach, sole owner, operator of Green Roots Performance and Wellness, a semi-private training facility in Williamsburg, Virginia. and they offer strength and conditioning services to middle school, high school, and college athletes, as well as adult fitness as well. But he's also the strength and conditioning coach for Bruton High School football team in Williamsburg, Virginia, and he was formerly the head track and field coach. I had him on over the summer. We did that special 6-part series on racism in fitness, and he was one of the first coaches that I contacted about it. So, Coach Green, thanks for doing this, bud.
Thank you for having me back. Glad I didn't blow it the first time and you asked me to come back on.
Yeah. Well, I originally saw you, and I always, and we talked about this a little bit on the show as well, is getting folks to get their name out there. And what I like about you is you're not afraid to kind of put your opinion out there. I wish I did a little bit more of that myself. Sometimes I'm always like, I need to say this, but then I'm like, well, and I think this is where, and I got a bunch of questions today from your tweets that I could have you expand on. And I could tell you right now, and anybody that's listening, is that's how, Coach Green was following me, and I saw, and I was following him, and I saw some of the tweets he put out there, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. He has an opinion. I like that. So that's how I personally am able to find people that are doing things and want to investigate more. So that's how, part of it is just having that Twitter presence that you have. And also your Instagram is a lot of videos and stuff that, showing, hey, this is what we do at our facility, good or bad, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is. This is what we do. You put it out there. So good stuff on your social media, Coach.
Much appreciated. I wish I was actually as fearless about putting stuff out there as I guess made out to be. But it's definitely watching watching my language, I'll say.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Well, I give people 3 topics just to kind of throw, like, what are some things they're interested in? You had talked about speed and power for the high school athlete. And I want to kind of take a step back a little bit, just in general speed and your philosophy, because I saw a tweet that ever since you switched to a sprint dominant training philosophy, quote unquote, the athletes I've trained have gotten faster, stronger, more mobile, and less speed up. I need you to expand on, what does this mean, a sprint dominant training philosophy?
Sure. So I was, I guess, kind of coming from a similar background as a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, at least as far as the male strength and conditioning coach, where I, played football basically all my life, played in college. And so we had certain things, I guess, we were accustomed to as far as strength and conditioning goes. And the weightlifting portion of our strength and conditioning program was probably made up 80% of it. And the speed part was either, you got it and we'll just work with what you got and turn it into conditioning, or we'll spend as little time as possible, maybe on our off day or off season, whatever it may be. So I guess over the last year or so, I've really been, because most of when I first really started training athletes, I started obviously training football players, being a football coach. But then I had the opportunity to work with a few of my dad's track athletes. And I realized that, one, yes, they need the strength, the power that we can develop through training in the weight room, but they also need the speed, the pure speed training that they might be missing from track. Going back again to my own experience, I ran track in high school. My dad coached track myself, and I kind of saw what happened. Obviously, it was only, a few places that I was aware of and had experience with, whether it be coaching or running myself or just observing. And I saw that a lot of track practice, at least at the high school level, a lot of track practice is kind of just conditioning for certain events. And I guess depending on what your definition of conditioning is would kind of, dictate how you ran your practice. But for me, it was just seeing that a lot of track practice was kind of just conditioning. So what I started doing probably at the beginning of this year, to be completely honest, was that I kind of went 50-50 to start. So I would do, obviously the dynamic warm up, then that would bleed into our movement prep. Then that would turn into either our sprint or plyometric work, primarily our sprint work, just because I believe that every athlete, regardless of sport, can benefit from learning how to sprint, which is a key, learning how to sprint, and then also sprinting, right? So I went from going to 50-50, so sprint, plyo work, primarily sprint work, into the last, if we have an hour, the last 30 minutes would be our lift. So it turned in from maybe doing a couple A runs or something at the beginning of the workout, and then having 45 minutes of lifting. We're doing, 6 to 8 lifts per day, to now none of my athletes, unless I had one who wasn't able to sprint for a while because he had a little knee issue going on, nothing major, but he was doing all lifting, obviously, because of his knee. But now they're doing no more than 6 lifts per day. And that takes probably, 20 to 25 minutes. And the rest of that time, obviously doing the work before is all sprint work. So now it's close. It looks like 50-50 on paper, right? Looks like 50-50 on paper, but it's really probably a 60-40, maybe even 70-30 on some days, depending on what day it is, obviously. And then the days in between, which would either be our low CNS or our sprint plyo work only day, is when we really, either, depending on obviously the season, we're kind of in a gray area right now, just because we are getting closer to hopefully playing sports. So this is kind of more of a preseason phase for us as opposed to off season still. But we're now, using those off days as purely speed days or plyo days, or just a low CNS day, depending. And I still individualize with pretty much all of the athletes. There are a couple who are fairly similar, just because in my point of view, their sports are, or their sports are fairly similar. That being I have a thrower on the track and field team and a volleyball player. And I feel like they're both, based off of the positions they play and the skills they have to develop, they're more power athletes, so they don't sprint as much as the others. But they still get their sprint work in, but they're focused more on just power development, plyometrics, things of that nature. But everybody's still sprinting. We sprint. Moral of the story is we sprint probably out of the 5 days a week that we have, and some of them do come in 5 days a week. Out of the 5 days a week, we sprint at least 3 of those days, and this is max speed sprinting. So at least most people say, or not most people, a lot of people say 95% and up, but I'll give them 90%, 90% and up on the intensity level, just to make that a full speed sprint. And that's 3 out of the 5 days of the week. So that's how I'm operating now with all the programs. And it's made a tremendous difference in not only obviously how they sprint, but also in their other areas. And it was kind of an experiment, I guess, to say, because I've heard of the Feed the Cats program. I haven't been involved with it myself or witnessed it or read it or anything like that. But I've heard, obviously the Feed the Cats program is I guess sprint dominant as well, but they still have their lifting in there. So I was kind of playing around with it more or less, just to see what type of benefits, what type of adaptations, what type of improvements can the athletes see. And they've all gotten stronger. Obviously, they've gotten faster. They've gotten more mobile. So I really can't, argue against it at this point.
So let me just let's expand on the volume. Coach Boyle talks about when he does it, he's doing his sprinting days. They're doing flying 10s, and they're doing about three sprints each time. They time them. What exactly? What do you mean? Are you doing from a standstill? What are you doing? What are you doing for sprinting, and what kind of volume within the session?
Sure. So majority of the time, they are standstill sprints. Again, because the athletes I work with, they're either coming out of a 3-point stance or they're coming from some stance where they don't have a kind of a fly-in, if you will. So majority of the time they will be standstill sprints either. And I just started using the facility I'm at is in it's in kind of a weird place. So there's space around it to do sprints, and I have a little bit of turf inside. But I don't have the space I would like to truly get in. Like if I were to do flying 10s with like a 15 to 20 yard build-in, I don't have the space for that. So I do a lot of short hill sprints, do some walk-in sprints, do some drop-in sprints. But majority of the time they are just strictly just 2-point or 3-point stance and just go get it.
How many rounds?
No, so we don't. Again, depending on the day, I'll say we do anywhere between 6 to 12 sprints, and really no more than that.
And how long did you say they were? Like I said, Coach Boyle does like the fly, 15 fly, some built up into 10-yard sprint that he's timing. What are you doing? What's the distance?
Yeah. For our true sprints, our 90% and up sprints, I have so far, and I probably won't in the future, but so far I haven't gone any further than 15 yards.
Okay. And you guys haven't had the injuries. I know, again, Coach Boyle wasn't doing as much of this because he was always worried about injuring, the
Right.
athletes. But now he's found that there's been no injuries, and he makes sure, no means no. It's like, look, are you hurt?
Right.
If you're hurt, there's no maybe. It's like no, and open your mouth. So
Sure.
you haven't had any injuries?
Absolutely. I haven't had any injuries. Obviously, when we first started this out, I started out when we got into it with the walk-in sprints, just so they do have that dynamic build-in, so it's not coming from a completely static position. They had a little bit of soreness was the most. No pulled muscles, no strains, no twisted ankles, nothing like that. Had some strange, I guess, discomforts, I guess, which I wasn't really expecting. But again, it's coming from, either your high school where they pretty much just lift weights, and sprinting is kind of, if you want to run track, that's where you're doing it. But other than that, I haven't had any injuries. The only injury, and I wouldn't even call it an injury just because it's kind of it was pain, but when you get a diagnosis from a doctor, they'll call it an injury or whatever. But that wasn't from sprinting. It was from actually squatting, just because, and we can kind of talk about this later if we have the time for it. But actually had the young man that had the injury, had him yesterday running, so had him do some tempo runs. And he's been out of a brace. He should probably still be wearing the brace, but kids don't wear braces when they're supposed to. But I had him do some tempo runs yesterday. He said he hasn't had any pain. He was already telling me for probably the last 2 weeks that he misses sprinting and doing all the things that he was doing before. So I had him do the tempo runs yesterday and no pain. So I haven't had any injuries, thus far.
Nice. You were talking, you had a tweet. I have an extremely deep affinity for contrast training. I will say, though, I've never contrasted hill sprints with regular flat ground sprints. I like it. Just what is this? How did you do it? And like, what was did you go regular flat ground sprints into a hill or hill? What did you do? Obviously it's the hill first, probably because that's the, but, how did you do this? How long were the sprints? And, just give us a whole rundown of this.
Sure. So to be completely honest, this wasn't my idea at all. I didn't come up with it. I am currently a participant in Sprint Timber. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but Sprint Timber is essentially the it's the more athletic version of Squattober. So it's Coach Mike Tucker, who's up at Villanova. He created Sprint Timber just to get people, primarily coaches, aware of and delving into the importance and the benefits that sprinting have for athletic development. So I believe last week 3, we started contrast sprint. So it was either, and it's great because he gives the option of it, and so you can either do a prowler sprint contrasted with a regular sprint, or do a hill sprint contrasted with a regular sprint. So I chose to do the hill sprint. And the hill sprint, they gave the range of, I believe it's 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 15 yards, contrasted with another 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 15 yards on the flat sprint. So I chose to keep since the hill sprint is obviously a little more intense as far as the recruitment you need to accomplish it. I chose to keep the hill sprint shorter. So at 10 yards, I did 3 sets of 10 yards. And in between each 10-yard hill sprint, I did a 15-yard flat ground sprint. And it was interesting because me being, obviously a strength and conditioning coach, I kind of think about, the biomechanics and the physiology it takes to accomplish whatever task I'm doing. So I was I was trying to, match the intensity and the mechanics of the hill sprint, because obviously it is a little bit different going up an incline than it is running. Trying to match those mechanics, obviously, so the contrast would be more realistic and more applicable. And it was fun, actually. I enjoyed it. It was hard at first. The first couple of reps I put on Instagram looked weird, I guess. But once I kind of figured it out, it actually worked out pretty well. And I probably one of the better contrasts I've done.
What was the grade of the hill?
I have no idea.
Was it if we are going to say steep, light, or middle? Was it was it a big hill?
Because I've done hill sprints on some fairly steep hills. I would say it was low.
Yeah.
But obviously I don't have the measurements to tell you exactly. I would say it's low based off of the hills I run on, and probably the steeper hills that I've been on were probably useless for me to do sprints on, because the mechanics completely changed what I was supposed to be doing. Kind of like jumping on a 30-inch box and my butt's below my heels kind of defeats the purpose. So it's kind of the same concept where if the hill is too steep, you're not really accomplishing what you think you're accomplishing. So I would say it's a lower hill, low to medium hill, I guess. And then the ground obviously was completely flat. At least that's what they told me.
What's the rest period? How much?
Rest was at a minute.
In between the hill and the flat?
Yep, in between each one was a full minute at least. Which in my mind is essentially just walking back to wherever you're starting from. Maybe count to 20, right, and then go into the next rep. And I do remember Coach Boyle, I think it was on Twitter, Coach Boyle was replying to someone that was saying, the full minute rest, especially if you're going for shorter sprints like 10 yards, the full minute rest might not be completely necessary. One, for time purposes, because we're all limited on time to some extent, but also just because physiologically, you don't necessarily, depending on obviously your level of training, you don't necessarily need that full minute. But it was roughly a minute. I don't. And this one thing I do tell my athletes when we are doing sprints, unless we're inside of my facility, and I actually want them to focus on deceleration. I never tell them to slam the brakes on or put the brakes on at all. Just tell them to take their foot off the gas and just cruise out. And it's also kind of a good gauge to see how fast you are running, is just to see how far you get carried after your acceleration turns off.
Interesting. Cool. Now, are you going to try this with your athletes?
Yeah, I already did, actually.
Oh, you did? I wasn't sure if this was you doing it. Okay.
Yeah. So it was me doing it. I did it last week. And then I implemented it this week into our actual sprint work, just because we're at a phase now where they can handle the intensity. And they didn't do, I think they did was 3 sets of each. So they didn't do any more than 6. And I did keep their flat ground sprints. I kept them to 10 yards. So it was 10 and 10 on both ends.
Okay. Cool. Let's kind of segue this. We had Nate Van Kallenberg on last episode talking all about youth athletes. And like we talked about, you're the strength and conditioning coach at Bruton High School football, and you also still work with middle school, high school athletes as well. So talk to us about your speed and power for when you're approaching the high school athlete. What are you doing? Because when I looked at you put your training model up, you didn't put power per se. Like you didn't say like, we're doing power, we're doing Olympic lifts, whatever. You said sprint plyo. So plyo, might be what you're considering power. Talk to us about how you're programming speed and power for the high school athlete.
Sure. So a lot of the programming I do is essentially based around speed and power. All the athletes I work with, to some degree, have to be fast and or powerful. So I don't really, and obviously, strength is a part of that, of that power equation, right? But as far as sports goes, if you're the fastest person or the most powerful, you're probably going to win, or you have a much better chance of winning. So in my mind, anything outside of speed and power is kind of, on the back burner until we absolutely need it. Obviously, we still, as beginning athletes, or when I get in new athletes, I build up that strength base so we can get to the power and speed. But after that, it's all power and speed from there. So the sprint work, the plyo work, our lifts, unless it's upper body accessory, is all speed and power related. And so a lot of what I have to do first and foremost is their technique. Unfortunately, being in the strength and conditioning field, I can kind of see now that most, and it's kind of expected because they're young adults, learning their bodies, learning how to move, along with all the other stresses of life. So their technique is essentially, god awful, for the lack of a better term, as far as, formal athletic maneuvers go. And obviously in athletics, there has to be some type of individual nuance and individuality to how they move to problem solve, essentially. But, we still want to have those formal, constructed, patterns and movements available to us. So a lot of the technique that I teach later goes into our power stuff. And I tell them pretty frequently, and actually I pretty much tell the younger athletes, because they're the ones that tend to forget exercises or, forget how to do a particular movement. I tell them all the time, there's only so many movements I'm going to teach you while you train with me. And all of the movements that I teach you are going to be applicable to something else. So a lot of the techniques I do specifically for speed and power, we learn the positions and the posture for sprinting, right? Because if you've ever been to track practice, you kind of hear, and this is obviously isn't everybody's track practice, but on the grand scheme of things, at the high school and even lower, middle school, if they have middle school track or AAU or whatever, a lot of the coaching that goes into track is kind of, get your knees up, run faster, things of that nature that aren't necessarily, in my eyes, productive. So we take a lot of time, and this isn't just for the track athletes I train. This is for everybody. I've had linemen, even the thrower I train. They all go through the same progressions of sprint mechanics. Just again, because once we get into sprinting, they can benefit so much from sprinting that I want them to know how to do it efficiently. So we do a lot of sprint mechanic stuff. Still do it to this day, even at the beginning, or our movement prep. Do a lot of A runs, A skips, build ups, things like that before we actually get into the actual sprint work. Just so we are dialed in on how we're supposed to move. Because at this point, I haven't had any new athletes come in a few months, probably since before quarantine. Actually, haven't had any new athletes come in. So at this point, all of the athletes I work with, they know it might not be, Olympic grade, but they know, how they're supposed to be moving when they're sprinting. And the same applies for our plyometric work. We start with all of our landing mechanics, drop catches, low grade depth drops, multiple drop catches, things of that nature, where we're, landing on 2 feet, getting our hips in the position they're supposed to be in, hitting those positions again, just like for the sprint work, hitting the positions they're supposed to be in, to land effectively, and then that translate over into our higher intensity plyometric work, where we actually are, doing multiple obstacle jumps or weighted jumps, things of that nature. So they are prepared to absorb those forces.
Yeah.
So a lot of the almost counterintuitive when you think about it, because when you think about speed and power, you kind of just want to let them go and get better from there. But I kind of work backwards and focus on for sprint work, at least focus on the picture that they're presenting as far as the posture and patterns and positions that they're hitting. And then for plyometric work, just focus on, the better you can land, the better chance you have of having a pretty decent jump. So that's how I program for speed and power for high school athletes. The technique work is a big chunk of it. And then we kind of let them go and get some good intensity in, keeping the volume. Most of the volume I program is for most things is fairly low, unless we are on a lower CNS day or just a active recovery day. The volume is pretty low most of the time. I tell them all the time, like, I don't really expect you to leave here exhausted on most days. You should be, fatigued a little bit, right? But you shouldn't be drenched in sweat unless you have overactive sweat glands or something. But you shouldn't be, not that you shouldn't be, but you more than likely won't be drenched in sweat. You won't be breathing super hard, again, unless it's a active recovery or conditioning day. And it's kind of that who is that was the Buddy Morris quote that says any idiot can make somebody sweat or something like that. So I again, speed and power, the work to rest ratio is the key for that, which kind of ties into that exercise science piece or bioenergetics of how we're supposed to operate for speed and power to be developed. And I think that's kind of undervalued, is that development and usage are not the same thing in instances like this, because you can use your speed and power doing conditioning, but that doesn't mean your speed and power is going to improve by any means. So if I'm the speed and power development coach, not just as my title at all because it's too long, but if I'm telling kids I'm going to develop your speed and power, then that work to rest ratio, as well as the technique you're using, to make sure you're moving efficiently, those are the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah. Now, just touch on this. Coach Boyle posted the fastest female time that they recorded. And it was like a 1.07, 10-yard fly, 15-yard fly in. And then her arms are kind of all over the place. And he wrote, please don't tell me if we fix her arms, she'd be faster. Talk to me about this idea of learning versus just sprinting and just getting them to do it. And I don't want to say figure it out on their own, but there's some things that you probably, our friend Coach Casey Wheel was talking about. Sometimes we waste valuable time on something that obviously doesn't matter for her. Then we can make her slower by taking away her natural way of creating speed. That was from Casey. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I completely agree. And while I just said, technique is a big part of efficient moving and efficient performance, it gets to a point where we aren't trying to produce robots. So I like to call them technique guidelines as opposed to technique rules. So I truly believe that, yes, while technique is super important to athletic development, it isn't by any means the it's not the end all be all for performance. Technique is super important, one for safety purposes, as well as efficiency, but at the end of the day, again, athletes are going to have to find their own individual flow in how they can solve problems, whether it be how to run faster, how to cut faster, or jump higher, whatever that may be. Same applies to the weight room.
Yeah.
Everybody there are guidelines on how to squat, right? Hip and knee movement, obviously, there has to be some ankle mobility involved. All of those science things we know, but not everybody's squat's going to look the same based off of, how their body's structured, right? So if somebody's fast, and we've seen this, time and time again where people kind of break down Usain Bolt or Michael Johnson, how the guidelines that certain people put out where they say this is what it's supposed to look like. They don't look like that, but they're the fastest humans on earth. So if you correct that, the times are going to go up because they're not using their natural ability to run fast. And it just doesn't work that way. So there's a very, very fine line between technique guidelines and technique driven, I guess you could say. It was interesting because I had a conversation probably when who was Simone Biles, when she did the first pitch for some Major League Baseball game, everybody was going crazy on Strength Coach Twitter about how she threw the ball with the same arm she stepped with. And I'm like, she's a gymnast and has more medals than anybody in history. Her throwing a baseball or having the ability, we say that the ability to catch and throw is athletic performance or athletic development or a requirement. Her being able to throw a ball the way you see fit is not going to make her get any more medals, right? So if they're, teach them the guidelines, show them, tell them, teach them, how things are supposed to move, how everything is connected, and then let them, like you said, don't want to say figure it out, but at some point, honestly, they will have to figure it out for themselves using the information that you've given them, the feedback they receive, data where you can time somebody and show them the time. Yesterday, for example, I had a tennis player come in, and we did some of the contrast sprints, right? I had her do it with a sled instead of the hill. But regardless, I timed them, told her the times. She made adjustments or not if she didn't need to. I told her, if there was anything mechanically that I saw that she might want to think about. I'm not going to tell her to fix something if she knows how she feels better than I ever will. So if she feels that, her mechanics were either the best she could do or, the what she has available to her, then, who am I to tell her she's wrong just based off of some textbook I read.
Yeah, true. Coach, just stay on the power idea here. Does your power just consist of sprinting and plyos, or are you doing any Olympic lifting? What's your med ball? What's your med ball protocol if you have any? What are you doing for that?
Yeah. So sprinting and plyometrics, that's majority of our athletic, I'll say, power development. I am an Olympic lifting guy, but that's not to say I'm Olympic lifting only. And that's, that conversation or debate or whatever you want to call it, that'll go on forever. But I do have majority of the athletes that I train, they do perform the Olympic lift to some degree, whether it be the full lift or a variation. But I also have, athletes that are either younger or have a very young training age that, do trap bar jumps or X bar jumps, whatever you want to call them. Just because either I don't have the time to teach them specifically the Olympic lifts, they're not physically prepared for the Olympic lifts, or they don't really need it. So I kind of understand both sides of that debate, where, yes, it does take a little bit of time to efficiently and proficiently teach the Olympic lifts. But I do believe that there's value that can be received from learning and taking that time to teach it. But again, if I don't have the time, if, for example, like the college athletes, their schedule was a little weird this summer. Some of them went back, some of them didn't. If I just need you to get more explosive, we're just going hex bar jump shrugs, or I could teach you a hang power snatch because it's fairly simple for the most part. And it's relatively easy to teach. The positions obviously are, they're very technical, but the hang snatches, is something you can pick up fairly quickly without having too much strain placed on your body, where you're like, for example, the front rack in a clean or front squat, that's not something that comes natural to most people. But putting your hands up over your head with a bar, most people can do that, right? They might not be able to throw up the most weight in the world, but they can get to that position at some point and produce the forces we're looking for. I do med ball work. Most of the med ball work I do is pretty much just vertical med ball launches, and I put emphasis. I know a lot of people call them med ball tosses, but I think words, to quote Coach Joe Ken, words win, right? So I think the words we use when we're naming exercise have a big impact on how they're being applied and how they're being done. So I call them med ball launches because I want them to think about spaceships, right? When they're throwing the medicine ball. So everything we do with the medicine ball, where they're throwing it either as far as they can or what have you, I call it a launch because I really want them to launch it, And so we do med ball tosses, Olympic lifts, hex bar jumps, plyometric jumps, box jumps, things of that nature. We do it all, and go from there. I know a lot of people or a lot of coaches, they say they're one way and don't mess with the other. But I think they're really missing out on the full spectrum of tools that are available. It's one thing if you don't have the background to teach it or to correct it, but if you do, or if you have the time to learn it yourself, then I definitely, think it's of immense benefit to do so.
Coach, you also posted another tweet, executive decision to go to floor press. You had a video of a young lady pressing from the floor. You said, number 1, it's safer. Number 2, rep reliability. 3, less shoulder strain. And then 4, closest test to what the program utilized while still checking the above boxes. So I feel like, though, the floor press still can be a little awkward with some heavier dumbbells. But talk to us about, are you trying to stay with that? You feel like it's safer, especially with the shoulders. You are checking all those boxes, safer, rep reliability. So just expand on this idea.
Yeah, so the reason, and to put it in the full context, is and it kind of goes into the whole quarantine messed everything up category.
Yeah.
We were actually maxing out that week. And we haven't touched a bar and a bench since December of 2019. So everything we've been doing as far as pressing goes, whether it be vertical or horizontal, was with dumbbells. And so we've just been building up heavy dumbbell benches for, essentially the whole summer since I've been back open. And took me the whole week to figure out how to test that. Because I did want to test it, one, because, they enjoy doing it. And two, because I kind of wanted to see where they at and to see, if the programming up until that point, which is kind of the point of maxes, right? To see if the programming up until that point was useful. So the best way I could figure out how to test a dumbbell bench was to do it on the floor for those exact reasons. Just because, a heavy dumbbell bench could go wrong in so many ways, and obviously I don't want that liability. I don't want to put them anywhere near harm's way, right? So doing a heavy dumbbell bench didn't really make sense to me as far as maxing out goes. And I'd never done any type of, even for myself or for anybody I've trained, I've never done a dumbbell bench max. So floor press the options were floor press, regular dumbbell bench, or dumbbell bench max reps. And the max reps didn't make sense because we hadn't been doing that up until that point. So that was washed.
Yeah.
And then the dumbbell bench max effort didn't make sense just on a safety scale, which is first and foremost. So that was out. So it was the floor press just made made the most sense. And yes, like you said, it was when they got up to the heavier, especially the guys got up to the heavier dumbbells, it was still awkward. And, it's just finding that smooth spot where you can kind of explain to them how to best. And it was a good teaching experience, really. Just telling them how to manipulate the weight in a way that they can get it themselves. And I did have to, for the guys that got up to like 100, I did have to assist them, obviously picking the dumbbells up, but it was a good teaching point, good weightlifting or weight room rather teaching point of how to, if you find yourself in a gym at some point in life and you don't have anybody with you that can help you out, you need to get the weight up by yourself. This is how to do it. So it's just stuff like that, which I try to do pretty often with a lot of exercises, just to build that, build the relationship between me and the athlete, telling them how to do something on their own, and then also, just preparing them for down the road, so they can hopefully continue their fitness or performance journey.
Yeah, if they don't have a bench either at home, right? It's nice that I had my clients doing that.
Right, exactly. So that they have all the information, or as much information as I can give them. I didn't create any of this information, so who am I to keep it from someone?
Yep.
So I just, give it to them when I can, so they can carry it with them. So, later down the road when they find themselves by themselves, they can, still take care of business.
Yeah, it's always nice to have options, obviously.
Right, absolutely.
Coach, you also, another tweet though, and this kind of segues nice, is like you typically don't max the athletes that come in your facility, but times are different, and they've got more of it before competition. So what do you mean by times are different and they've got more of it before competition? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so with with COVID and quarantine and everything, sports were for most. Well, I say for all of the athletes actually that I work with, their seasons got either canceled or pushed back. So, and they were still coming into training, which is awesome. But we had more time, and as we all know, training can get kind of monotonous and boring, and might lose interest and things of that nature. So, I think that's really what I think a max out week is good for, is just breaking up the monotony and kind of, pushing yourself to see what you got and see the progress that you've made over the last however many weeks, just to, test yourself really. So usually I don't, just because again, I have limited time with the athletes I work with. And so maxing isn't a priority, we can still push it to those higher intensities without maxing them out per se, and without completely frying their CNS. But this year, since we had more time, I figured, why not? It'd be fun, see what everybody's doing. And, they enjoyed it. Kind of, like I said, broke up the monotony of the training program. And, they got some pretty good numbers. A lot of them surprised themselves with how much they were able to move. And, it worked out. But I probably won't be doing it again.
Yeah. Okay. Coach, let's finish up with some conditioning talk. So you were talking about, I think what a lot of us talk about, 98% of conditioning, quote unquote, is understanding energy systems and the demands of individual sport you're training. Okay. Volleyball is not going to be the same as basketball, but here's where I want you to expand on. Playing surface similarities do not impact the demands of energy system usage. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so being involved with sports myself as a coach and former athlete, and also working with athletes that are obviously still involved with sports, I ask a lot of questions, about what especially for the college athletes, they're pretty much the only ones that have true conditioning tests. So I'm always interested, just based off of what I've done in the past, interested to compare, what they're doing, if it's effective from their viewpoint, how they felt about it, things of that nature. So playing surface seems to be thought of as, if you play on grass, you should be able to do A, B, and C. If you play on a court, you should be able to do A, B, and C. So I was talking with one of my athletes, and she was telling me about and we talk about it all the time, one of the conditioning tests they do. So I asked her, she plays volleyball. So I asked her, you know, did that help you prepare for volleyball? Right. Running up and down the court for however many times. I haven't been to a ton of volleyball games in my life, but I've been to enough where I can kind of see that doesn't really take place at all. Sure, they you know, might get gassed or, you know, might have a long rally where they have to, you know, tap into that lactic system maybe, but they're never to the point where they're, you know, gasping for air or, you know, reaching for their inhaler, not asthma pump. It was just an observation really that, you know, we're kind of still stuck in the age of, you know, a conditioning test is supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be aerobic, and, you know, it should be, you know, that quote unquote mental toughness task at the beginning of every season. And I think this, you know, it's missed just because, one, the definition of conditioning is essentially preparation for a particular event or situation, right? So if we're conditioning truly, it should be based on what exactly that sport is and the energy system it needs. So the playing court is kind of I wouldn't call it a metaphor at all, but it's just, you know, basketball and volleyball are not the same sport by any means. Football and field hockey aren't the same sports. They're very different. They utilize different energy systems. And just because they play in the same arena on the same court, you know, the very few people, the conditioning tests that I've heard athletes do, and I've been involved with myself, those conditioning tests apply to probably just cross country, in my opinion. And that's kind of where I, you know, got that thought from, was just based off of what I've been through, based off of what I've heard, you know, other athletes go through, you know, just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just based off of science and what, you know, science has presented to us as far as, you know, what certain sports need to be successful. And it kind of, now that I think about it, brings up the tweet Christian McCaffrey put out, I guess last year before the NFL season, about how he changed up his conditioning and preparation training before the season, and then to see how much success he had doing that. Not to say that was the only thing that helped him, right? But it didn't hinder him either.
Yeah, and I think obviously we always have to take those things into like not a case-by-case basis, but looking at their history, their training age, what they're doing, the other things they're doing within the gym, et cetera. So it's always hard to look at that. And so, but wow, Coach, thank you so much, first of all, for coming on. We got
no
to
problem. Thank you.
So much stuff here that, you know, like I said, I love what you're doing on social media and what you're putting out there. It makes my job easier because I just say, hey, you said this tweet, expand on it. It's easy for me to question. So I'll have links to your social media. I'll recommend everybody to go and go interact with Coach Green because he likes it, and he's had some great quote unquote arguments on there as well, right? You know, with some good, clean arguments. So, Coach, thanks again for coming on and expanding on some of the things you're doing.
Absolutely.
Down there.
Thank you.
Appreciate
it. It was a pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 298 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 30 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. All right, special thanks to Chris Porter and the folks over at Perform Better. Don't forget, right now, Perform Better, the holiday sale, 40% off select items, over 100 items on sale. Do not miss this. Check it out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Kendall Green for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam and Tim and TrainHeroic for the TrainHeroic data-driven coaching segment. Don't forget, Coach Boyle and I both use TrainHeroic to deliver all of our online training. Head over to TrainHeroic.com and start your free 14-day trial. My name's Anthony Renna. My book, Be Like the Best, consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is a Be Like, an action step, or a challenge that will help you be like the best. Check it out at continuefit.com or belikethebest.com. That's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.